All right, Mike, then let me just begin by saying how privileged I am to have been there in 1988 and all those years before the incident, almost what you may call the first impeachment, as it were, in Kenya. Of course, there have been other attempts at impeachments, but the most successful impeachment of a vice president happened during the 1989, and it was Josephat Karanja, professor. But let me take you back a little bit, just to set the things rolling. The most controversial election of our time happened in 1988. That would be the last final Mlolongo system of election. Given that thereafter, there would be a change in the way we do our elections. Kenya had reached a boiling point, a tipping point, in terms of oppression, in terms of, let me just call it dictatorship, if you may. It had reached a boiling point. The anger in the country was very visible. It's almost like the anger I see today. The anger in the country was very, very, very hot. You could feel it. You could feel it in the air because of the control that the system or the government had on the people. And remember, 6 years earlier, there had been an attempted coup on the government of President Moi. And after the coup, things were not going to be the same again in Kenya. The system became more agitated, they became more controlling, and anybody who was dissenting, any dissenting voice would be punished, and punished very, very harshly. And the best way to do that was to arrest them and detain them without trial. And people would be detained for months and years without trial. And so on. That was oppressive nature. And the intelligence system that time, known as the special branch, had really almost, it was very oppressive. Then, 1988 happens. With the same anger, with the same oppression, it was controlled election.
The creation of so many constituencies.
Yes, in fact, that's when Kachaliba constituency was created. It was created in 1987. And I was going to run for that position to become the first member of parliament for Kachaliba constituency. A very, very young man that I was then. I was probably 29 years old. And I was running, but the system controlled who became the member of parliament. KANU, the only party allowed by law. Remember that Kenya was a de facto one-party state and became and the de jure one-party state almost in the span of time. So by law, you only had one party. You could not start another party or even start discussions around another party. And that is the place where intelligent people, educated people, were being suppressed and oppressed. Because you can't have intelligence and then you accept things the way they are. And so there were talks everywhere about starting a multi-party system in government. And the pressure kept building up until one day, later as we could learn, in 1990, things became very hot. And later on, KANU gave in. But let me just take you to my own election. In 1988, I was not supposed to be elected because the party had their own candidate in Kachaliba. And everywhere, there was predetermined who was going to be the MP for that particular area. And that's when you saw that there were long lines and there were short lines, and the short lines won, and the long lines lost, and things like that, because it was predetermined. So there was always an attempt to rig me out. I was not supposed to be elected because I was not the party's candidate, choice candidate. However, I was the people's candidate. And the people of Kachaliba decided, you just count on us. this one is a president's candidate, this is a party candidate, but we will vote for you. It didn't take long before that happened. The Mlolongo happened, I was rigged out of Mlolongo, but I was able to go to the polls, to the secret ballot, and then I won at the secret ballot. And I became the first member of parliament for Kachaliba. The story is too long, but the party wasn't happy with me for becoming a member of parliament, and only a few months later, I was then expelled from that party, and so I lost that seat immediately thereafter, becoming the shortest serving member of parliament in Kenya. I'm just taking that to show you what would then happen to...
You were not elected in Kano.
There was no other party. I was elected in Kano. But I was not the Kano candidate. I don't know whether you understand that. They had their own choice, but I beat that choice. I defeated that choice and made the first mistake of my political life was to beat the candidate that was the system's candidate. And it wasn't long before I realized I wasn't needed here. And so without even asking for me to come before any board, it was decided I should be expelled. So along with a few other people, we were expelled that day. We were some of the first expellees of Kano. And when you were expelled in a one-party system, you lose your seat immediately, and there's a by-election. And so I lost my seat, and the person who was preferred was brought in to become the member of parliament. So it was a controlled system. It was a predetermined system. There was no internal democracy, and that is what then caused the agitation for multipartyism, which culminated in the famous rallies, the Sabasabas, and all that, because people were getting very tired and impatient. So, so the day that Kanu decided to hold that famous meeting, where they declared that they declared that now Section 2A of our Constitution can be repealed to leave room or create room for multipartyism. In fact, if you read Ole Kaparo's book, Calming the Storms, you'll find details of that, because he was there. He was one of those guys who proposed that we should actually accept to break this, this one-party system and accept multipartyism. I'm just saying this because...
Can we say Moi was using his vice presidents to clinch power and dump them later on? Or his people that were famous to get into power then dump them, because you also
Definitely.
were famous in Kachaliba?
Definitely. What was happening is that, remember the pressure from the coup. There's been pressure almost every decade in this country. Whenever happened, we turn a corner, there's always some kind of pressure. When politicians were assassinated or something happened, it always brought pressure to the politics. This particular coup had brought a place where intolerance had grown. So when Mwai Kibaki was removed as vice president, and they needed to replace that person with a person from the same region, the idea was they chose Professor. And Professor came in very hot, very fresh, not a politician, but an academic. And it was nominated quickly and made vice president, because you have to be in parliament at that time. It was a parliamentary system. So, yeah, but the problem with the politics of the time is that there were so many small power centers in every region. There had to be some small power centers. You can imagine, in every province there were some powerful guys who were now put there by the system to control the rest of the people. And when they didn't like you, they would bring accusations against you. They would bring it to this dining table where they met, and they would discuss you. And very soon they were discussing Josephat Karanja. And Karanja and Josephat, a poor guy, was trying to be a politician at that particular time, in a difficult time. But you remember, he was just an academic guy. He came from the universities. And there are always many people in our system trying to take your space. And you can see even now, as we are impeaching, or Gachagua is being impeached, people are already preparing to take over. You know, there are people already lining up, you know, making applications, trying to make sure he goes so that they can replace him. That is what used to happen in this country. And so you could be accused of anything, you could be brought in accusation, and then you are removed because somebody else is waiting on the wings.
When were you elected again as a member of
So what happened is then I left because now I was expelled. And when you're expelled, you become you're treated like a criminal. You're no longer, you're partyless. You're now basically exposed. And I realized that the next thing they were going to do was arrest you, detain you, something like that. I successfully left the country. And then I went to the U.S. and lived there. I lived there for 4 years. Why? Because I was waiting for multi-party system to come in. And when the system, 1992 elections happened, I was very quick. I was one of the first people just to return, to come back home, because freedom had finally come to the country. And I would now be elected in the year 1997, together with President William Ruto now, and a few other people. That's the time when I came back to Kachaliba. And the same people defeated that candidate and elected me again. So it was like,
in 1987, I understand there was a censure motion to host Ole Kaparo as the speaker. And it was defeated in Parliament after about eight votes against the motion. There was also another motion to post the Vice President in 1999. You were in Parliament.
I was. No, you know, now after the KANU was still a very strong party. KANU in the election of 1997 was still very strong, had many more members of Parliament. And even those who came from opposition, some of them sold out to KANU. A very similar thing we see today. If you are planning to control the House, you must win some of the people from the opposing side to increase your numbers and make sure you have the threshold to do that. So that's what happened. Well, fortunately for Ole Kaparo, you know, he was saved by the party. And he became it was difficult for him. Becoming the first speaker in a multi-party parliament was not easy, because every time you say the ayes have it, the opposition thinks you have been decided with the government. There's not one time when you say the noes have it. And so the pressure was building on him to become fair, to do justice. And I think he managed in the end to try and toe the very tight rope, to walk the very tight rope. But anyway, because KANU was still very powerful, he was saved by that. He was able to stay. And any other attempt that came later, KANU was still very strong, because KANU could actually, if you look at the history, or the people who are elected from the opposition benches, the parties in the opposition benches, many of them were bought. Many of them defected. That's when we had the term defection. Many of them defected to KANU. And Moi used that, President Moi used that to build his team in Parliament so that they could control what happens inside Parliament. And that's what's happening. You can hear that today. The first thing that the President Ruto did immediately was to get some of the troops immediately to build the numbers in the House.
Can you say President Ruto is using Moi's playbook?
I think there are books out there, you know, the 48 Laws of Power and others that these people are using. But being a very good student of President Moi, it is the system in Kenya today. And I don't think it's just President Ruto. I think anybody, President Uhuru would do it, any other president coming would still do the same, because of the security and the safety of your seat. Because if you allow yourself to be watered down, diluted, you definitely will begin to feel the heat. And so this whole thing about you must control, because you want to stay in power. You want to stay in power. You want to last. It's your 2 terms or something like that. Then these systems have been learned from history, but also it looks like it is the thing that keeps the people in power. It has been proven. So, I mean, any president coming in could probably use the same, unless they want to be a one-term president. Yeah.
Thank you. Tell us something about Kenyambia.
Kachaliba was called Karapokot. The original name actually was Karapokot. Before that, it was actually called Karasuk. The story of Karakachaliba, as we know it today, it was a forgotten territory of Kenya, granted to Uganda, the governor of Uganda, to control, to administer. And the agreement signed in 1929 came into effect in 1931. And the agreement was this part of Kenya called Karasuk, Karamoja Suk, the Pokot were called Suk at that time. So it's Karasuk, should be administered by Uganda. Because of the cattle rustling issues that the two communities have, it is easier to manage them from one side. And they chose to manage them from the bigger side, which is Karamoja. And so we were donated, loaned to Uganda, and we became Ugandans. So the deal was from 1931, for 40 years, we should be administered by Uganda. The idea in the mind of the colonial government was that maybe by that time the two communities will gel, or maybe one community will be assimilated, and then there will be peace. That never happened. It never happened. It was like mixing water with oil. The Pokot and Karamojong could not gel, could not mix. First of all, they're two different cultures, and also language is very totally different.
But previously, in 1923, we understand Kenya, also a big portion of the country, was administered from Kampala.
Well, that we were part. No, I mean we were. That's a big part. Some parts of Kenya, but the Kachaliba part was administered from 1931, from 1929. Actually, the whole thing started in 1929, but it was an experiment for 2 years. Then it was confirmed in 1931. The 40 years started counting in 1931. I tell you what, Kenya got independence in 1963. Karapokot was still in Uganda. After independence, Kenya forgot that they had a piece of land in Uganda. Never went for it. And remember, we were in Uganda for administration only, not for development. We are Kenya, and Kenya should have continued developing their territory. Uganda was not going to develop it because they were just administering it. And Kenya forgot to put money to develop that part of the world. So we had no schools. We had no hospitals on this side, on the Kenyan side. And we went to school in Uganda. That's how come I went to school in Uganda. And how come all of us who were educated in that place went to school in Uganda? There was no place to go to school. And high school, there was none. And we went to Uganda for high school as well. So the reason I'm saying this is that the government in 1963 should have said, now we are independent, give us back. No, they didn't do that. And for 7 years after independence, nobody came to Kachaliba from Kenya. We continued to stay as part of Uganda. 7 years after independence, until the 40 years expired naturally, which it did in July of 1970. That's when we automatically ceased being Ugandans. That's the name Kenyampia. We became now part and parcel of Kenya. And the first DO was then posted to Kachaliba in 1970. And the Uganda government had no problem in 1970 releasing Karapokot to Kenya because it was an agreement. It's there. In fact, I think J.S. Mathenge, who was a deputy PC in Rift Valley, and Nyachai, who was a PC, are the ones who facilitated that transfer. In fact, when I spoke to Simeon Nyachai, he told me that he took one of his prefab houses from his farm to Kachaliba to start the first office, because that was now the handing over of to Kenya.
Is Kenyampia also connected to the 6 kilometers you were given by Ethiopians in Moyale after Kenyatta?
I don't know about that story, because I know that Kenyampia was us, Kachaliba. There may be other Kenyampias elsewhere, but it was us. Truth of the matter is this. We came out of Uganda in 1970, July. 6 months later, Idi Amin took over power in Uganda. And if we had delayed by just 6 months, Kenya would not have taken us back. I mean, Uganda would not have released us, because Idi Amin was claiming more land. We would still be in Uganda. And I don't know whether what that would have done. But maybe there would be a war between Kenya and Uganda or something like that. But it was very fortunate that we came out in 1970. In January of 71, Obote was overthrown, Idi Amin took power. Only 6 months later could have changed the history of West Pokot, Kachaliba, and even my own personal history. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.